Salvi's Search for the Universe, Chapter 5. Yonder arm strewn ravenously rod-richtly, not of erring unawing, strike the difficultly brittly maceration of fleshy flesh, fallen, vigil flared, Salvi's sweltery freets clombered pon cracked stone will well weathered. Salvi do so sighten yonder man of man yet man? Followed squirmer chamal thus do squirmer neath feet yo man yonder. Salvib's belly beest muchly bellows. Matchedly bower fallen vigil, whose depthed, yet yon yonder craven thou beast stripped unstrips delicacy so fabulous. Yonder poster present, handen given, reachedly extended towards. Gripen given? Salvis yetly glede, not to be matched by flight or fleen. Smelled so fine, breath so fair, noted yo mortally maiden. Snatchen, freshly vigil, mouthly more woden gapen. Teethen broaden, teethen sinken. Vigil do screamen. Me talon crackled against foe screening stone. Screamin'. Screamin'? Screaming? Head jerkin'. Jerking? Salvi woke to the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth, and the shrill sound of pain yelling in her ear as her head was violently thrashed about. She felt her teeth had sunk into something. Immediately she realized what she was doing and released her bite, jumping up in shock. The filthy human fell backwards, his arm punctured to match Salvi's present and missing teeth. Blood leaked from the dozen holes. He gripped her tight, mewling and rocking in pain. Salvi was speechless. She raised her hand in concern. The man scrambled to his feet and ran away in a frantic rush.
"Salvi, very sorry,"
she yelled after him. As the man disappeared around the corner of the alley, she frowned and sighed, suddenly depressed. Vaguely she recalled being roused into partial sleep as someone approached her as she slept. But she didn't mean to bite the poor human. It was just that he smelled so good in her dreams. She hoped his arm would be okay. She looked down and noticed the pendant on the ground beside her feet. It must have come off somehow while she was asleep. She would need to be more careful next time. She picked it up, slipped it past her horns, and let it rest against her chest where it belonged. The sun sagged past its peak, the midday heat already beginning to wane and weaken with the afternoon. That was some good sleep. She breathed the rank yet girlishly exotic city air as she put on her usual grin. Why was she supposed to be sad again? She had forgotten. She licked her teeth and tasted the blood. Oh, right. Well, humans were smart. He would probably think of something. She skipped into the street, fully rested and ready to appreciate it properly. Humans were walking up and down the street. Briefly, she looked back towards the castle in reminiscence. There was some humans on horses surrounded by several others at a gate. He was wearing that shiny, full-body metal that important humans seem to wear sometimes. But she had seen enough of the armored men. She turned away and continued down the street. All the humans on the street were giving her funny looks. She tried to smile at a woman fixing her with a concerned stare, but she suddenly screamed and ran away. Why was that? Oh, right. The blood. She licked her lips and teeth completely clean. For what it was worth, human sin seemed to taste very good. There, now she should be good. Another human was approaching. A swarthy, burly one, whose skin looked cracked with sea salt. She grinned at him, and suddenly had run away. He chased her with his fist in the air, shouting something so thickly accented she doubted they were even words. She scampered away, skidding around the corner and pressing her back against a barrel. Slowly, she peeked over the top. Apparently, he had decided it was more trouble than it was worth, and started to walk away. Perhaps she should stop smiling at humans. The cobbled streets were surprisingly dark, molded with drifting shadows cast by the tall buildings looming above, that only seemed to grow taller the more she looked. Like stretching giants or gnarled trees reaching high. They only grew wider as they grew taller, some as tall as 4 stories, until the harsh limits of reality could squash the building's ambitions. Inside the walls, not even vertical space was wasted. She filtered into a larger street, and after the 100th concerned and confused glance her way, she finally realized that she really stuck out here. And she wasn't even smiling anymore. Sure, she was one kobold among thousands of humans, but it wasn't as if she was some kind of mythical beast. As much as she liked and admired the humans, they were a lot easier to deal with when they were asleep. Though it was the first time she had walked amongst humans without immediately being chased out. That was something. She should be happy about that. There really was a lot of humans. They just kept coming and coming until nothing but fabric filled her vision. The sight above nothing but a sea of bobbing heads as she was jounced about the rapids of the human river. She was trapped. She felt like a lump of dough between the rollers, being pushed this way or that. If not for the humans recoiling in shock whenever her scaly tail brushed against their legs, instinct taking over as they mistook it for some new market-dwelling and perhaps venomous snake, she would have been at the complete mercy of the human flow. She pushed and pushed, finally stumbling out of the crowd, landing on her hands and knees somewhere to the side. She looked up and locked eyes with the twiggly man and smiled despite herself. He recoiled in horror, but stood his ground, or rather, sat upon his rough woolen rug. Lined up all around him who were pointless knickknacks and curios, whose only apparent purpose could be to be displayed upon an empty mantelpiece, to impart some kind of trite visual interest barely ranked above empty space. Salvi's eyes sparkled as she looked at the crudely carved wooden soldiers. The dabs of paint that were supposed to be their eyes spilled out across their face and looked as if they were placed there by a spasmodic drunkard attempting to paint some kind of white caterpillar rather than human eyes.
What? Who are you?
The man asked. Salvi ignored him and picked up the soldier, gripping him tight between her hands, his head peeking out from between her palms. It was a tiny human. Incredible! She turned and walked away. Something suddenly seized her wrist. She looked at her hand and followed it up the scrawny arm, and seemed surprised to find a human at the end making crazy eyes at her, his moustache dropping down like a horseshoe as if doubling up on his frown.
I'll call the guards,
he stammered, clearly terrified by the creature in his grip, but his apparent desire, or desperation, for money keeping him from just letting the horrifying thing walk away with the silly trinket.
No guards!
Salvi threw up her hands in surrender, dropping the wooden soldier to the carpet. She had seen enough guards already.
Well?
He drew back his hand like some court lady who had just touched something nasty.
Off with you then. Go. But Salvi won't. That's too bad. It's not for sale. Just run along now.
He flicked his wrists as if shooing away a cat, and suddenly yelped, recoiling as Salvi crossed her arms petulantly.
But Salvi won't. Fine. It's 2 silvers.
Salvi's frown deepened.
Oh, okay. 5 coppers.
She just kept frowning. Of course it cost money. Everything costs money. She wished she could trade, but a guard at the gate had said only merchants were allowed to trade. Which was true. Only merchants were allowed to pay with goods at the gate because they had the backing of their respective trading guilds and carried the required paperwork in order to validate their worth. But Salvi knew nothing of the intricacies of city law and trade, and was completely unaware that bantering was perfectly legal.
4 coppers? 4 coppers. I won't go any lower.
There was a pause.
Stop looking at me like that. I've told you, I won't go any lower.
Another pause.
I'll take whatever you have. Just please go away. Trade?
She perked up and looked around, shifty-eyed, leaning close.
Even though illegal? What?
Then it was his turn to glance around, suddenly shrewd. He leaned in, suddenly whispering like the rustle of paper. I told him I don't have the money yet. Are you working for Samsar or...
Nope.
Salvi cut him off, and the man almost fell backwards from the shock. She dug through her coin purse and pulled out one of the shiny yellow ones. The man seemed to like soldiers, and this one had a picture of a soldier on the back. It seemed like a fair trade. The man's eyes went big as dinner plates. His brow climbed up so far his head Salvi thought they might slip all the way out of sight. She held it out, and a man darted forward, careering over his carefully stacked knickknacks to snatch it out of her hand, but missed as she suddenly pulled it back. Now that she was looking at it, she kind of liked it too.
So,
He barked.
I'll give you 2 soldiers.
2?
Salvi gasped. She crossed her arms and made a thinking face. The man's face pimpled with sweat. He bit his lips so hard it was in danger of chewing straight through as the seconds stretched and stretched and...
Okay.
She held out the metal rectangle, which the man snatched with near violent rapaciousness, not giving her any chance to change her mind. He stared at it in utter awe before catching himself and stuffing it into his trousers, like it was the last piece of bread amongst 1,000 beggars. He spent the remainder of the time trying to act inconspicuous, as Salvi picked out her favorite 2 soldiers. She chose one that looked like the guard Gavin by the gate, but even the wood could hardly do the angles of his face justice. She was tempted to get the one that looked like the guard in the window, just so she could eat it. But that would be a waste. She chose the one with the axe instead. Axes looked cool. She stuffed her 2 new friends into her pockets, who she decided to name Gav and Axe, before she continued down the street. She was careful to skirt around the edges of the crowd this time, much to the ear of the occasional merchant as she tromped around their carefully arranged wares with a blithe ignorance. There were doors all along the street. Swinging signs hung above, depicting simplistic images of this or that, with text running beneath. Salvi wished she could read. She walked into the buildings whose sign appeared to be some kind of book, she thought it was called. She walked into the building, eyes wide to take it all in. It smelled of paper and dust. The wary shopkeeper suddenly straightened, excited, but could only deflate and squint in confusion as the little kobold made one lap around the shop and then promptly left, cleanly and routinely, as if she was some kind of mechanical doll built into a clock set to come out on the hour. That was interesting. She repeated the same with several other shops, earning a mix of expressions, ranging between bewilderment and annoyance. She compared the sight, smell, and shocking variety of things the humans put up for sale in the shops. It was a shame she didn't have any money. The last shop she went into didn't have much of anything for sale, and it was only when the people inside started shouting and throwing things at her that she realized it wasn't a store at all. She hurtled towards the door. A miniature soldier whisked past her head, apparently the most useless thing in reach. As she flung herself out, she pressed her back against the alley wall and panted. That was enough browsing for today. The rushing crowd slowed to a trickle, and the hawking cries of vendors died off in the distance. She walked down the narrow tributaries of the road, stretching further and further from the hustle and bustle of the central city. Mud pooled on the side of the narrow streets, cobble cracked to gravel in places. The buildings grew decrepit as she advanced, plastered walls crumbled and beams bowed, as if each step she took to another stage in the rotting process. The entire area reeked of habitation. That ineffable mixture of musk, excrement and sodden mold that existed in the absence of any form of hygiene. Some humans drifted about the derelict streets, their limbs twainy and caked in dirt, sitting against their crumbling buildings like overripe fruit. Other humans walked the streets, their colorful clothing clashing harshly with the brown filth-clad garments the paupers wore, like the visual representation of social hierarchy. Their disinterested expressions making it clear as fine glass that it did not belong here with the rest of the filth. It was simply a shortcut to their real destination. Salvi had never seen such pitiful-looking humans, so she was quite interested. She stared at them with childlike innocence, examining everything from their scrawny limbs to the scars left by the many diseases that plagued their kind. They did not have the energy to express anything like annoyance or anger, and simply rolled over, hiding from her prying eyes. She saw a pair holding out their hands pleadingly towards the streetgoers, and to Salvi's shock, they dropped coins into their hands. Her mouth gaped. All you had to do was to hold out your hands and people would just give you money? She jogged to the street and held out her hands expectantly. She waited and waited, and nothing happened. All humans just passed by, giving her nothing but their glares. Maybe she was doing something wrong? She looked over at the other beggars, who looked back at her with tacit disapproval, and tried to cup her hands exactly like theirs.
Even beasts mock us now.
She swirled her head towards the man standing behind. His wiry beard smeared with dirt, the filth conspiring to make him look 20 years past his true age. He did not look angry, only disappointed.
Do you enjoy it? Seeing many humans beneath even your kind, withering into dirt for scraps? It must be very funny to you, wicked creature.
Salvi blinked.
Those clothes, that jewellery, you must be one expensive pet. But take a good look. This could happen to you someday.
Salvi blinked again, trying desperately to understand what he was talking about. He had that look, like he was about to spill out his entire life story.
It happened to me. Used to be the finest. She knew it.
She listened until she could take no more and raised her palms, silencing him in the middle of a long-winded recollection of his duties as some kind of servant for some kind of important human.
You like soldiers?
She asked. Yes, but those days are long behind me now, and... Salvi interrupted him again and dug through her purse of metal rectangles before pulling out another yellow one with soldiers on it. His eyes bulged, too stunned to even move. He just stood there, like an idiot until Salvi got fed up and stuffed it into his dusty trousers for him. She was sad to give away another one of the shiny soldiers, but the human looked really sad. Hopefully that could cheer him up. She ran off before he could say anything, afraid he might try to drag her back into his life's story. She had seen enough of this place anyway. It smelled worse than she did. The buildings seemed to knit themselves back together as she left, going backwards instead of forwards through time. There were far less people on this side of town, and she was surprised to find the lush greenery growing along the paths, arranged with deliberate neatness. It was a welcome break from the urban sprawl, the smell of flowers helping cut the pervasive stink of the city. The cobbles grew fat and circled around a great burbling fountain, sitting under the shade of several big oaks growing through holes built in the cobbles. It was probably the only part of the city apart from the castle courtyard where you could look straight up without seeing a building. Water lapped and danced. Salvi leaned her scaly elbows on the stone rim of the finely carved fountain, spewing water into the air just because it looked nice. It was another incredibly human thing to do. She added it to her mental list before taking a drink of the cold water. She laid back on the rim, idly kicking her feet over the edge as she stared up at the dimming sky, simply appreciating it. Humans were pretty inventive. It was nice here, but it would be much better when she stole Itty and brought it back to her tribe. The gentle breeze caressed her scales. She imagined everything around her, but with a kobold's touch for the practical, and was suddenly interrupted by something that sounded like the deflation of an extremely flamboyant balloon. She sat up, and to say her eyes were drawn to him would have been an understatement. It was more like they were being held hostage. He sat on the bench beside some stringed instrument, with elbows on knees and fists on shin, sighing like a wounded swan. His clothes were a garish amalgamation of fabrics, frills and seams. It looked like the statement he was trying to make wasn't as much about fashion, but instead about how much fabric he could afford to ruin. Everything was cut, braided and pleated upon itself in contrasting colors of red, green and yellow, until his arms puffed out twice as far as they should, and resembled snakes fighting to the death up and down his body. His face was pale and lean, with a thin waxed moustache in a style that doomed anyone wearing it into looking like a flamboyant fop. The bells on his flaccid cap tingled with his sigh. He was the most absurd human Salvi had ever seen, so naturally she had to investigate. She sat down beside him. Only his eyes acknowledged her, one quick shift before staring blankly at the space ahead.
Why human look like idiot?
What?
He yelped.
Have you never seen a mistral before?
He pressed fingers to chest indignantly, making sure she understood that he was the mistral in question. His voice sounded as funny as his sighs.
No.
Of course you haven't. I wasn't sure what I was expecting.
He went back to leaning on his fists and blew away one of the bells hanging between his eyes with a malcontent pout.
Why humans sad?
Human, human, human. I have a name, little missy.
Name?
She tilted her head invitingly.
Brandlecoff. The great Mistral Brandlecoff.
He made sure to stress the Mistral part extra hard, hoping the great would go unnoticed.
Why
She struggled.
Brandlecoff sad?
Why Brandlecoff sad? Why Brandlecoff sad? I'll tell you why Brandlecoff sad. Brandlecoff sad because every man, woman, child and animal in this blasted city is an insufferable cretin with no taste whatsoever. None! You'd think they all had their tongues cut at birth. I've been thrown out on my arse from 5 different establishments, and it's always,
Brandlecoff is too loud.
oh,
Brandlecoff, it sounds like you're beating the layer to death and it's upsetting the customers.
none of them understand. See? Here's where one of the filthy wretches threw their dinner at me. And here's where the little bastard gutter snipes tore my suit. Look! Look!
He pointed emphatically, but Salvi couldn't see what he was trying to point out. It all looked torn to her.
All they want to hear is eyes over the mountain, or 2 deep rivers, or Jarvis bloody Gerald's jaunty jig. Faugh! Play them one song they haven't heard a million times already, and they're up in arms. Utter codswallop!
Brandlecoff make music?
She asked excitedly. Truthfully, that was all she could extrapolate from his triad.
Well.
He cleared his throat, trying his best to look modest.
I suppose you could say that.
She had never heard human music up close before.
Play, play.
She urged. He sighed breezily.
If I must.
He picked up the lute, took a deep breath, and exploded into motion, wailing at the strings, his hands a whizzing blur. The air wreathed with twangs and plucks, with his extended grunts interspersed between. It took Salvi several seconds before she realized that he was supposed to have a melody beyond pure chaotic noise. But that did not mean it sounded good. In fact, it was quite the opposite. She could only stare vacantly until he finally stopped, sweating beads down his face.
So, what do you think of my music? I wrote it myself.
What 2 River Deep sound like?
Was all she could ask. He looked at her. His puffed chest and ostentatious grin melted away as he looked at his lute like it was some kind of foreign instrument. He fingered the frets, hands shaking as he tried to play at an unfamiliar speed. He plucked 3 notes at uneven speeds, then twanged a sour note. He cursed himself under his breath and tried again. He got 4 notes in before striking another sour tone that cut through the air like the musical equivalent of an embarrassing noise. He threw off his lute and wailed to the sky before catching his head in his hands. He moaned,
I can't do it! I can't do it!
Before breaking into funny-sounding sobs. Salvi really didn't know what to do, so she patted him on the back apprehensively. His bells twinkled sadly.
Nobody likes my music. I should never have left Canehorn. They make it sound so great in the books and stories. To be a free spirit, to travel the world. But they never mention all the sore feet, and the bar fights, and sleeping in haylofts.
He sounded dangerously close to spilling out his entire life story. It was at this point that Salvi would usually get bored, but his voice sounded so funny, so she kept listening.
You know, my name isn't even Brandlecoff. That's just some faff I thought of because it sounded, I don't know, minstrelish. My real name is Felix von Canehorn. The only reason I ran away was because I didn't want to inherit House Canehorn. When I was 7...
He proceeded to describe his entire childhood at length. By the time he had prefaced the whole story with his father's overbearing demands and his carefree attitude, Salvi's eyes had already started to cross. It all became the same high-pitched blabbering noise, blending together, flowing straight through her skull, as he just kept talking, and talking, and talking. There was something in there about him needing to teach himself to play the lute in secret because his father wouldn't allow it. Most incredible was that he sincerely believed his music was good, insisting that it would become popular as soon as people realized how great it was. Finally, he finished after what felt like an hour. Salvi blinked in confusion. Where was she? The silence was deafening. She felt as if she had been pulled back from some transcendental plane of existence. She couldn't remember a single thing he was talking about. But she seemed to recall he was upset because his music sounded awful.
And now I'm stuck here. I can't play any of the popular songs, and no one wants to listen to the songs I wrote. Why not make music slow? I told you I can't play anything slow. Whenever I try to play anything I didn't write myself, my fingers just... No!
She waved her hands.
Play song but slow. You mean to say, play something I wrote, but slower?
She nodded emphatically. His face suddenly turned thoughtful. He grabbed his lute, plucking experimentally before breaking into another feverish shred of strings. His face twisted in concentration. It was still fast, but now its beats per minute were under the number of days in a year. A melody suddenly appeared. It still sounded terrible, but it was something. He stopped playing and stared at his lute.
It actually does sound better.
He was clearly astonished, considering he already thought it was the greatest thing.
Thank you, what's your name? Salvi. Thank you, Salvi. Your advice was very accurate.
He looked at his lute, then smiled at Salvi.
Would you like to hear some of my poetry too?
Without waiting for a reply, he took his instrument, took a deep breath, and screamed.
Darkness imprisons me. All I see, absolute, hey, Where are you going?